Tonight we're taking a trip into the KGW vault to revisit the most devastating storm in the Pacific Northwest's modern history. Today marks 60 years since the Columbus Day storm brought hellacious winds through parts of the valley that we haven't seen before and we haven't felt since. Meteorologist Joe Ranieri joins us now with the story.
Well, Pat, 60 years later, and we haven't seen a storm rival the Columbus Day storm. Nearly 50 lives were lost that day when winds as strong as a Category 3 hurricane swept through the valley, and people only had just a couple of hours of warning something big was on its way.
You could describe the Columbus Day storm as the perfect storm.
The force of the storm was recorded on wind gauges around the state.
And on October 12th, 1962, it was a storm nobody had ever witnessed before here in the Pacific Northwest.
It was an extraordinarily strong storm. I mean, it was a very deep low pressure center, and it took a track that was just perfect to hit the western Washington and Oregon areas with winds sometimes gusting over 100 miles per hour.
Dr. Cliff Mass is an atmospheric sciences professor at the University of Washington in Seattle. He's also written books about the weather in the Northwest.
For the last 100 years, that was the biggest storm. The Columbus Day storm was the biggest storm to hit the region.
He says this historic event started from the remnants of Typhoon Frida that formed weeks before in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
A lot of our really big storms have this history. They start as a tropical storm, a typhoon, in the Western Pacific. Then they move northward and they transition into what we call a mid-latitude storm.
By the time Frida moved along the coast, it wasn't a typhoon anymore, but the storm was still producing extremely strong winds.
A very warm air mass in front of it.
Clinton Rocky with the National Weather Service says everything lined up that day.
Had the perfect conditions, everything came together. Doesn't happen like that all very often, but in this case it definitely did, and it was a rather memorable storm.
Even as the winds started to move through the valley, wind speeds picked up well over 100 miles an hour. What was it like here in the valley? Destruction up and down the interstate from Portland to Northwest Washington.
But to have one with such a wide scale, such a wide reaching of its effects, that's pretty unheard of for the most times. I mean, this eastern Oregon, eastern Washington, Seattle, San Francisco, everyone felt it.
Take a look at this weather report filled out by a weather observer in Corvallis. It shows the pressure falling quickly, but they had to abandon the station because of the strong winds, where winds peaked at almost 130 miles an hour. It was much higher along the coastline.
We're talking about nearly Category 3 type winds of a hurricane status. The strongest winds of 160 to 170 mile an hour winds along the coast in places.
What's incredible is the technology 6 decades ago.
There were some ship reports, but we really didn't understand what's going on out there.
Was nothing like what we have today.
And today, where we have satellite data that covers all the oceans, and we have aircraft data aloft, we have buoys, we have all this information. So we really know what's happening out there now.
Back in 1962, people had just hours to prepare. The winds were so powerful, the KGW TV signal tower was knocked down, but people could still get the storm report from the radio.
I just came across town from the airport, and the damage is getting quite widespread. The wind was getting more violent all the time as I was traveling through.
That's the radio warning that came from the late KGW meteorologist Jack Capel, who knew something big was on its way.
He's kind of the Walter Cronkite of Portland weather.
Meteorologist Matt Zaffino still recalls the story Capel told him about that day.
He didn't know exactly what yet, because he hadn't looked at the imagery, the one satellite image they had back then. But he could tell something big was happening. The trees were moving, trees started coming down. Early in the day, people started losing power, and he's like, this is going to be a big deal.
60 years later,
he basically, talked Portland through the Columbus Day storm, the biggest storm we've ever had, on radio.
We look at the Columbus Day storm.
That's just unfathomable, seems like. Thank goodness these storms don't come around very often.
We interrupt our regular KGW program schedule to bring you this weather advisory.
As the storm of all storms, and something we haven't seen in more than half a century.
Yeah, speaking more about the tower that was wiped out up on the West Hills, the KGW TV was out for about a week, so engineers could get up there and repair it. Now let's look at the wind speed. Some of these numbers are absolutely wild. Again, something we have never experienced since the Columbus Day storm. Take a look in Portland. The Morrison Bridge gusts up to 116 miles an hour. Can you imagine if that happened today, how many roofs would be ripped off and just how much destruction would be taking place? Again, millions of dollars were damaged, and we talked about the lives lost. Well, hundreds more were hospitalized from this storm.
All right, Joe, still to come on the story.